You are entering a world filled with darkness you rue, a shadowy void where nightmares come true. A world full of horror, of evil and sins. Between castles and monsters is where hell begins. Where we celebrate the sinister, so push through the thicket. And welcome, dear traveler, to my world of the wicked. Today, for those who do not know, marks the 81st anniversary of the Railway series by the Reverend W. Awdry. This year also marks the 42nd anniversary of the popular TV series inspired by his children's stories, Thomas and Friends. If you've been looking at my page since at least last year, you'll know that I'm a fan of Thomas the Tank Engine, at least to an extent. This series was my first childhood love, you might say. Before Alice, before Batman, it was this colorful series about a collection of talking trains I adored most as a wee tot. I collected the toys, I got every VHS I could, I had so many books, including an omnibus of the original Awdry stories. It was my everything. Thomas was my imaginary friend. His show was my comfort when I was sad, and Soda was something I wished I could share with others, but never really had the chance to. However, I stopped really keeping up with the series properly early in the hit era of the show. I think sometime during season 9. By that time, to put it simply, I was growing up, and the show was growing down, so to speak. And once CGI rolled in, I pretty much lost any interest in it at all, since the model animation style from before was a big part of what made it so special to me, and as many know, those early CGI seasons were not great. For a while, Thomas was effectively dead to me, a thing of childhood sentiment and nothing more. However, I later decided to give a sort of soft revisit to the series. And I say soft revisit because I haven't looked at everything. While I have taken a look at assorted episodes and specials from the CGI era, I haven't seen all of it. I haven't even bothered looking into at least half of the hit era, and I won't touch All Engines Go with a 39.5-foot pole. In short, I am primarily familiar with the first 7 seasons of the series, the classic era, the ones I grew up with and remember best. But I'll say this, most of what I have looked into beyond that, I have enjoyed. Nowadays, for various reasons, I have a new appreciation for this franchise even beyond my own nostalgia, and I've come to enjoy it in a whole new light as an adult. Thomas is more than a relic of my past. He is a shining beacon of my childhood, and will always be special to me. I decided it would be fun to do a countdown related to this series, given what an impact it's had on my work output in recent years, as well as my life in general. So why not take a look at something I don't think gets talked about enough in great detail with the show, its villains. In the words of a certain movie, every story, like a railroad, has its heroes. But what is a protagonist without an antagonist? Where is the conflict for the hero to overcome? Thomas and Friends isn't exactly known for its villains in general, but there are quite a few of interest worth taking a look at. With that in mind, a few ground rules. First, I won't be counting characters I see more as flawed protagonists in the grand scheme of things, rather than outright antagonists. For example, Gordon, Henry, and James routinely cause trouble through their collective arrogance, but they're generally considered to be protagonist figures. They just get too big for their buffers sometimes. The characters here have to be considered antagonistic for the majority of their time on screen at least. They don't have to be pure evil or even all that scary, but they do need to consistently be perceived as dangerous troublemakers. I also won't include characters from the series Tugs, because that's really its own separate thing. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I will not be including fan-made characters anywhere here. It just doesn't seem like it's fair. Sorry, big brother. No attention for you today. With all that in mind, we have a schedule to keep, and the Fat Controller does so despise confusion and delay. So please climb aboard and let's get this journey started. These are my top 10 favorite villains from Thomas and Friends. Number 10, Boulder. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking. JJ, that can't count as a villain. It's a big rock. Well, by thunderation, I'm counting it. In the Season 5 episode, Rusty and the Boulder, Rusty the Little Diesel and a number of other engines are working at a new quarry in the mountains. High on a cliff is a boulder, which Rusty believes is in some way alive. And the scary thing is, he might be right. At a couple of points in the episode, we actually see an eerie face appear on the boulder. And throughout the episode, a lot of stuff happens that seems too wild and too perfectly timed to be pure coincidence. Indeed, it is strongly implied that the boulder, which eventually comes after the engines, might be some sort of paranormal entity, presumably protecting the mountains from being meddled with. Why is it doing this? What could this entity be? We have no idea. It is a giant, complete, total question mark. This is part of what makes Rusty and the Boulder one of the most memorable episodes of the show. Other episodes deal with ghost trains and spooky things, but in most of these cases there's a logical explanation for everything going on. The Boulder is a rare case where the supernatural seems to just be the supernatural, plain and simple, and there is no easy answer to offer. And considering this thing tries to flatten multiple engines and their crews, as well as running into a shed apparently full of mining equipment and causing it to explode like something out of Michael Bay, I say it definitely veers more towards the villainous side of the spectrum here, whatever its motives and origins may be. And for any of you who want to argue this thing doesn't count as a character, I refer you to trading cards, plush toys, and other forms of merchandise that all seem to treat it as such. Again, I know nobody else will likely include this oversized bowling ball on any similar list, but I am. Moving on. Number 9, Max and Monty. I debated whether to count these two bothersome dump trucks or not, at first mostly due to their history in the series. Max and Monty were originally envisioned as the quote-unquote heavies for a spin-off show of Thomas called Jack and the Pack, later retitled Jack and the Sodor Construction Company. Unfortunately, after several episodes had already been completed, the show was cancelled at the last minute. If that had been where the story ended, Max and Monty wouldn't be seen here at all. However, the finished episodes were later released to DVD, reformatted and packaged as Thomas episodes. On top of that, the crew of characters, including Max, though not yet Monty, appeared in the parent show in a two-part story from Season 6. Going further, these rascally dump trucks and the rest of the pack would continue to pop up throughout the show afterward, so, given that all of their appearances do now count as Thomas episodes, and they have a life there, I think they can be easily counted. Max and Monty are the most troublesome members of the pack. According to behind-the-scenes info, they were inspired by the fact that many people on construction crews the creative team interviewed apparently disliked the truck drivers, thinking of them as arrogant and overly impatient. That's exactly what Max and Monty are. These naughty twin trucks are braggarts and bullies, constantly belittling the other vehicles on the crew and causing all kinds of trouble with their practical jokes and reckless antics. Inevitably, as always happens with characters of their sort, they end up eating crow in the end, and are shown for the boastful frauds they are. They may not be outright evil, unlike some of the other characters to come. They don't necessarily do anything to deliberately cause harm, and they definitely have their soft sides, but they are certainly not a nice pair. Anytime they show up, you can be sure trouble is rolling in behind them. Number 8, George the Steamroller. George is the first character on this list who got started in the books. He was later adapted into the TV series. Like many such characters, he was originally intended to just be a one-shot figure, but the show ended up expanding on his role. In the episode Steamroller, George is introduced as a rude, loudmouth steamroller who hates railways. If he had his way, he'd have them all torn up and turned into roads. He soon gets into an argument with the headstrong Sir Handel, and the two end up involved in an accident as a result. In the following season's Lady Hat's birthday, George was shown to be rude to his fellow road vehicles as well, as he sneered at the old automobile Caroline and bluntly suggested she should be scrapped. His crowning glory was the episode By George in the same season, where the steamroller is called to help turn an old disused branch line into a road, and in the process deliberately causes havoc for the steam engines, resulting in more than one accident. After this, George just kind of disappeared from the show, aside from a few non-speaking appearances and cameos. He was at one point considered to appear in the movie Thomas and the Magic Railroad, where he'd act as a henchman for the evil Diesel 10 and go through a redemption arc. I'm tempted to say maybe that was why he never showed up again. But since George was dropped from the movie pretty early in development, it's hard to say. Regardless, the Steamroller is one of a few characters on this list whose appearances may be small in number, but whose impact is still recognized. Number 7. Ari and Bert. Also referred to as Iron Ari and Bert, these two diesel shunters work in the scrapyards and smelters of Sodor. The scrapyards, as you can imagine, are a place few engines want to go to for any reason. Being scrapped in the language of living machines is, well, death. And not a very pretty death either. When Ari and Bert were first introduced in the episode Stepney Gets Lost, they basically represented that idea of a horrifying end incarnate. Early promotional materials literally described the pair as grim messengers of doom. In the episode itself, they are depicted as ghoulish, sadistic, demon-like diesels who gleefully delight in capturing hapless engines to destroy. However, perhaps because characters that dark wouldn't necessarily make for good, frequent storytelling material in the future, the two very quickly changed. By the time of their next appearance, Middle Engine, the duo were changed from menacing monsters to just a pair of thugs who love playing tricks on steam engines. Despite working a pretty nasty job, they seemed less malevolent and more mischievous. This is pretty much how the twins stayed for the rest of the series. Not evil death machines, but more akin to a couple of stereotypical loutish bully types. They're rough, but not too bright. Think they're better than the quote-unquote weaker steam engines, and they like causing trouble just for fun. I've always had mixed feelings about the change in Ari and Bert's depiction in the show, but they certainly stuck around a long time and became pretty iconic in their own right, showing up at least once or twice in nearly every season after their initial debut. For that, if nothing else, they've definitely earned a spot on the countdown. Number 6. Bulgy. Just like George the Steamroller, Bulgy was first introduced in the original books as a one-shot character, and his story was adapted into the series. He first showed up in Season 3 in said episode, which was aptly titled Bulgy. In the story, Bulgy is a rude double-decker bus who wants to ruin business for the railway. Unlike George, who just hates railways on principle, Bulgy specifically seems to think that railroads are a threat to his kind. He believes that he and his fellow road vehicles are truly superior, and deserve more attention and respect. Ironically, he's not necessarily nice to other road vehicles either, as he badmouths a friendly bus named Birdie. Bulgy gets his comeuppance when he tries to trick some of the railway passengers, and ends up wrecked after getting stuck under a bridge. The ruined bus was then left in a field and treated as a henhouse, as punishment for all his lies. For a long time, this seemed to be the end of him, but things are not always what they seem. The big red bus made a surprise return in Season 7's Bulgy Rides Again. In this one, Bulgy is restored and brought back into service, and seems ready to try and play nice and change his ways. Unfortunately, things just don't work out for him, but instead of reverting to his old habits, he does still reform, and becomes a vegetable bus, driving around and acting as a sort of mobile produce stand. This would have been a nice, happy ending for the big rolling baboon, but sadly, to quote the show, he never learned sense. In the CGI era, Bulgy would make a startling comeback, having apparently returned to his old antagonistic ways. His behavior is less outright nasty, he actually seems to befriend Birdie, but he's still a perpetual liar, still causes trouble, and still steadfastly believes in his own superiority. I guess it's true what they say, a leopard truly can't change its livery. Number 5. Sailor John. This character is special for a few reasons. First, because he's the only human villain on the entire countdown. There were occasional cases of human antagonists in the show and in the books, but in both they were pretty sparse for various and probably obvious reasons. The second point is that Sailor John is the only CGI exclusive villain on this countdown. Again, I haven't seen all of the CGI series, but I definitely made sure to watch the movie Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. This film is generally considered the best Thomas movie by fans, and I'm inclined to agree. It's not my favorite and best are two different things in my opinion, but this just feels like it's everything a Thomas fan could want from a cinematic standpoint. And part of what makes it work, of course, is the villain. Inspired by Long John Silver from Treasure Island, Sailor John is a scheming pirate who wishes to locate the titular lost treasure. Unlike Silver, however, who in the original book, and most subsequent reinventions, has some redeeming qualities, Sailor John is pretty much pure evil. This crooked codger cons Thomas and Skiff the railboat into helping him try to locate the treasure. But as soon as he feels Thomas is of no use to him, he's quick to turn on him. John is ruthless and obsessed. He will stop at nothing to get what he wants, even willing to try and blow Thomas up with dynamite to stop him in his tracks. This chase scene is probably one of the most intense moments in the entire series on that note, and that's actually saying a lot if you know this show well. To top it all off is the villain's voice actor, the late and legendary John Hurt. In fact, this was one of Hurt's final performances. He passed away roughly 2 years after this film came out. You'd never guess, though, as Hurt put so much energy into the role. He seems to just be having a blast, hamming it up as an old sly sea dog with all the typical trappings, snarling and cackling his way through nearly every line. Bottom line, while he may not have all the merchandise and popular attention other Thomas villains have, Sailor John is a huge part of what makes this movie incredible, and more than deserving of placement in my top 5. Number 4, Spencer. This silver speed demon is a private locomotive owned by the Duke and Duchess of Boxford, and the only steam engine on this countdown. Generally speaking, while many of the steam engines have their vices and flaws, most of them are generally considered to be good characters. Spencer, at least at first, is a totally different story. During the model season, Spencer was depicted as a vain and overly prideful engine, whose boastful ways always led to trouble. While other characters can certainly be described this way too, the big difference is they ultimately learn their lessons, at least most of the time, and are able to get out of their own smoke boxes and be there for each other when needed. They have good hearts, or whatever the equivalent of that on a locomotive would be. Spencer never learned. He was always just as much of a narcissist the next time he showed up as the last. And as a result, it didn't take long for the other engines to dislike him. When you make even Gordon seem humble and reasonable, you really need a reality check. This egotism reached its critical mass in the film Hero of the Rails, the first full CGI production of the franchise. In this film, Spencer outright tries to get a fellow steam engine scrapped. Why does he do this? Because he feels humiliated by Thomas. Earlier in the film, the tank engine called him out for being a pompous donkey and challenged him to a special race. Even though Spencer wins, he's not satisfied, especially since Thomas doesn't seem remotely bothered and congratulates him afterwards. Frankly, the little blue engine has a lot of other things to worry about. So, just to get even with Thomas and hurt him in some way, Spencer decides to try and find Hero, an old engine Thomas is trying to help, and drag him off to the smelters. Yep. Spencer basically wants to outright murder another engine he's never even met before, simply because he wants Thomas to feel humiliated and sad. That is Disney villain levels of evil right there. In fact, Spencer in this movie reminds me a lot of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Both are characters who have opinions of themselves that are way too overblown, and when they're not given what they want, they worsen their behavior instead of trying to change their ways. On that note, you'd think after this colossal misstep, Spencer would learn something, but he really doesn't. While he never does anything this vile again, and he does occasionally show softer sides to his personality, Spencer largely remains an antagonist and an arrogant twit. It's not until near the end of the show that Spencer finally seems to learn sense, after patching up his long-standing feud with Gordon. And it's telling that after this, he never appeared prominently again. I guess at the very least he did see the error of his ways eventually, but it was ironically a slow journey to redemption for an engine who was called the fastest in the world in his debut. Number 3. Diesel 10. I bet a lot of you were expecting this mean machine to be the number 1 spot. He isn't, obviously, but the top 3 ain't too bad. Diesel 10 is inarguably one of the most famous villains in Thomas history, which is kind of ironic given the reputation of the film he comes from, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. This was the first Thomas movie ever made, and to date, the only one released theatrically, at least as far as I'm aware. It was extremely hyped, highly merchandised, and a colossal flop, both critically and financially. After this movie came out, nothing was ever the same for the series. You can literally point to a lot of the hullabaloo that followed in the show, both on screen and behind the scenes, and trace it back to this film's failure. Among fans of the series, the movie is somewhat polarizing. Some people like it, some people don't. But virtually everyone who sees this film, at least within the fandom, agrees Diesel 10 is the best part of it. Originally, Diesel 10 was meant to be the secondary antagonist of the film, with a human villain called P.T. Boomer, played by Doug Lennox, as the main baddie. However, Boomer was eventually cut completely from the film, for a couple of reasons. After much rigmarole, Diesel 10 was left as the main antagonist. In Magic Railroad, Diesel 10 is described as a heavy metal monster, and that's pretty much the best way to describe him. This massive, fast-moving diesel engine, with a highly illegal hydraulic claw jabbing out of his roof, covered in hazard stripes, is pretty unforgettably over the top as a visual, and his personality matches that. Diesel 10 in the film is an utterly psychotic character, half hilarious and half scary as heck. Assisted by his hench diesels, Splatter and Dodge, his plan is to find the mythical engine Lady, who he apparently tried to destroy once before and nearly succeeded. Her caretaker, Burnett Stone, was able to preserve her, and it's a lucky thing he did, as it appears Lady's power is what allows Sodor to, well, exist. It's not clear if Diesel 10 even knows this, and if he did, whether he'd care. In his mind, destroying Lady is the best way to get rid of all the steam engines who he loathes with a mad passion. Despite his popularity and recognizability, after this, Diesel 10 didn't show up very often. He seemed to be the big bad diesel reserved solely for special occasions. However, oddly enough, each time he did show up, his character was completely retconned. In the special Calling All Engines, Diesel 10 is changed from a homicidal maniac to a grumpy but generally well-meaning character. His job is to clear the line of debris and load wagons at the scrapyard. This nicer take on the character also had a quick cameo in the film The Great Discovery. In the CGI era, he showed up twice. First in the feature-length special Day of the Diesels, and then a holiday episode of the series called The Missing Christmas Decorations. In these, he was reinvented as a cunning manipulator, who seems to be a sort of mob boss figure among the Diesels. Even here, he's softened up, as he seems subservient to the fat controller Sir Topham Hatt, and ready to drop his evil ways in favor of being a really useful engine. I think I speak for most people when I say that Magic Railroad, for better or for worse, is the definitive take on this character, and the one many seem to like best. A big part of what makes that version enjoyable is his voice actor in the movie, Neil Crone. The character actually went through multiple voices and performers during the creation of the film, but Crone's final voice, a theatrical cackle with a New Jersey-influenced dialect, is just spot on. It is the perfect blend of dangerously maniacal and totally ridiculous. That sums up Diesel 10 in a nutshell. Magic Railroad's archfiend is just a wonderfully entertaining villain, no matter what you think of the movie in general. It's no surprise he's still an iconic fan favorite. Number 2, the troublesome trucks. Now some of you may be surprised to see the trucks so high up, but really think about it. How much of everything that goes wrong in this series is either directly or indirectly thanks to these utter psychopaths? I know they're always just described as being foolish and cheeky, but that's frankly understating their lunacy. The trucks, also called freight cars, are a collection of little hobgoblins found all over the island of Sodor. They come in various shapes and sizes, but they are all equally demented. Ostensibly, their purpose is carrying and storing various forms of cargo and goods to be transported wherever the engines are meant to take them. However, at least 50% of the time, it seems, that cargo ends up lost, delayed, destroyed, or otherwise jeopardized, all because the trucks are completely insane. They absolutely delight in wreaking havoc in many different ways, without any regard for the safety of the engines, the humans around them, or even themselves. These wagons play multiple tricks, but they have two methods that are arguably the most dangerous. The first is forcing trains to go too fast, causing them to either derail or crash into other trains. The second is to break away and go running off on their own down the line with reckless abandon. Sometimes they act out because they feel slighted by one of the engines or other characters, with varying degrees of justification. But other times, it's literally just because they're bored and want to have some fun. On occasion, an engine will provoke them, and then they'll take their ire out on somebody else, even though it isn't the one who bothered them. In the words of the trucks, one engine is as good as another. And again, the worst part is, these liabilities on wheels are essential to the railway. They're used for all kinds of purposes and carry all kinds of loads. Coal, slate, fish, fruit. Seriously, how does the economy of Sodor not collapse completely with all these wood-framed demons running amok? 95% of everything they have to handle is in the dubious clutches of these rolling gremlins. In short, if you look up the phrase, "can't live with 'em, can't live without 'em," I'm pretty sure you'll find a picture of the troublesome trucks somewhere nearby. Before I name my number one choice, here are some honorable mentions. Frankie and Hurricane, the villains from the film Journey Beyond Sodor. I have not actually seen this movie, which is why they didn't make the cut. With what little I know of them, they seem interesting. Class 40, the colloquial nickname for the snooty diesel that shows up in the story Bowled Out. Honestly, really didn't do anything that wrong, he was just a rude jerk. The Horrid Lorries, the titular trio of nasty road vehicles from the episode Horrid Lorry. Might have made the list if we'd just seen more of them. The Spiteful Brake Van, an iconic antagonist from the books and the classic era of the show, but honestly, there's not a lot to say about him in his original form. Scruffy. In the story Toad Stands By, this gnarled old wagon is said to be the leader of the troublesome trucks, but he doesn't actually do anything that wrong in the grand scheme of things. He showed up a couple times after this in the TV show, but there's not a lot to say here overall. And finally, Schemer. Not technically a Thomas villain, which is why he doesn't make the cut, but as the main antagonist of Shining Time Station, the vehicle series for Thomas in the USA, and how I was introduced to the show, I would never have forgiven myself if I'd left him out of things entirely. And the number one is Devious Diesel. Devious Diesel, or just Diesel for short, is an interesting case of a villain who has had a surprisingly long and fascinating life beyond his original debut. Like Bulgy, George, and the Troublesome Trucks, he originates in the books. But in those books, he only shows up in one entry of the mainline series, Duck and the Diesel Engine, and he's really only around for half of that book to boot. His only other major appearance was a spin-off story printed much later, which may or may not be canon, so I'm not going to discuss it. In the TV series, however, Diesel has gone on to basically become the main antagonist of the franchise. He was a constant recurring menace during the show's first 7 seasons, showing up at least once in 4 out of those 7. And starting with the hit era in Season 8 and going into the CGI series, he pretty much became the show's primary go-to bad guy. Diesel didn't just gain more appearances, however, his character became more developed as well. He started off as a plotter and a troublemaker. He delighted in causing chaos for the steam engines and was determined to prove himself superior to them. And while that never really went away, he also gained some sympathetic qualities over time. It eventually becomes clear that Diesel's namesake devious nature is due to him feeling unappreciated and unloved. He doesn't quite know how to express himself around people, and as a result, he often causes trouble, and is quick to resort to his worst nature when he can't figure out a way to respond to a situation more appropriately. Several times he's shown signs of potential for reform and redemption, but it sadly never seems to stick. Whether he's plotting some dastardly scheme or just causing mindless mischief, he can never seem to shake his darker impulses or get over his own ego. In short, he's gone from a fairly minor meanie-face to being the single most complex antagonist in the series. It's telling that when the show went into its All Engines Go rebrand, Diesel was included as one of the series' main characters. He wasn't just a recurring threat, he was now regarded as part of the main team. Consider also a recent add-on to the game Train Sim World where they included Diesel and Thomas and basically no one else as special guests. I think it's pretty fair to say he's become just as recognizable as the little blue tank engine himself. Diesel 10 from Magic Railroad and Sailor John are unforgettably devilish. The troublesome trucks live up to their name with gusto, and other characters across the board like Spencer have their shining moments. But Devious Diesel has become just as important to this franchise as any of the more heroic engines. From fairly innocuous beginnings to one of the main faces of the show, he's more than earned his non-existent stripes as my favorite Thomas villain. And so ends a somewhat unconventional topic for World of the Wicked. I have at least 2 or 3 more episodes of this series planned for the year, and I think some of the topics I have in mind will be quite interesting for you folks. I hope you'll join me in the realm of darkness once more then. In the meantime, take care, my lovelies, and may your nightmares be pleasant ones. Until next crime.